Good morning. Thank you, Chris. I want to thank Chris for that rendition of that song that I sent him just this week and how exciting it is to hear it played on the piano live. I'm just used to hearing it on a recording, and it's a new song to me, but I've already decided I want to figure out how to set up my phone alarm to wake me up to that every day. I believe I was invited to speak this morning because of my relational organizing with MUSGEN, the Michigan Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Network. Because of my strong long-term relationships with networks of people and organizations, I have been able to engage many UUs across Michigan in racial, environmental, and Native American justice work and learning, which is a big part of the work. This morning I'm going to speak about two different types of relational organizing that are quite different from each other, but also can work together. I agree with Arisha Hatch, the Vice President and Chief of Campaigns for Color of Change, who said, quote, "For me, relational totally makes sense and is in line with generations and generations of organizing work. Word of mouth, community-based activism were the backbone of the civil rights, women's rights, farm workers, and labor movements. In fact, organizers have existed in myriad of forms since the very beginning of human civilization." Saul Alinsky was, however, the first person in America to fully conceptualize organizing as an approach separate from labor organizing. In Alinsky's hands, community organizing became a coherent field of action, and, quote, "community organizer" became a job description. So I have to send a shout out to him because that's a big part of the work that I do. Some call him the father of community and modern relational organizing. Saul initially taught labor organizations and church groups connection mapping techniques that enabled focused outreach. Soon after the development of relational organizing, handwritten neighbor-to-neighbor postcard campaigns were identified and utilized as effective personal communication techniques. The Back in the Yard Neighborhood Council he helped to organize in Chicago would be based on local democracy. Quote, "Organizers would facilitate, but local people had to lead and participate," end quote. Residents had to, quote, "control their own destiny." Alinsky wrote, "In our modern urban civilization, multitudes of our people have been condemned to urban anonymity, to living the kind of life where many of them neither know nor care for their neighbors. This course of urban anonymity, which also now is true in both the suburbs and rural areas of the US, is causing destruction to the foundations of our democracy. For although we profess that we are citizens of a democracy, and although we may vote once every 4 years," Alinsky said, "millions of our people feel deep down in their heart of hearts that there is no place for them. They do not count," end quote. So why is relational organizing a hot buzzword right now? Relational organizing is not new, but incorporating it as a central feature of a political campaign is fairly new, starting roughly in 2016 and really growing during the pandemic. The idea of voter engagement relational organizing has only just got started. Voter engagement relational organizing is in fact used to describe something you do all the time, talking to people you know personally and persuading them to take an action on something. For example, the pledge drive. It's a framework, sometimes described as a hub and spoke or a snowflake for what boils down to word-of-mouth communication, word-of-mouth activism. It's as simple as asking 5 people you know to vote and helping them to make a plan. Although you may know how your friends and families would vote, what you may not know is if they will vote. Nearly 50% skip voting due to micro barriers, logistics, hard to find info. Help them to make a plan to get over behavioral and systematic reasons people don't vote. Where is their polling location? What are the hours? What's on the ballot? Info about candidates, and sometimes things like childcare and transportation. Relational organizing can be as simple as a call, text message, or even a friendly chat at a work or a community event. Also known as friend-to-friend or peer-to-peer, and in Canvas, they have voter to voter. Excuse me. If you've ever gone door to door, you know that most people who even bother to answer regard you with something between hostility and skepticism. You have to build rapport and trust. Studies have shown that, quote, people are not changing their minds about something as personal as political ideology or preference based on one conversation with a stranger on their doorstep or on the phone. In 2018, the Analysis Institute's meta-analysis of voter turnout studies found that outreach from friends and families was 3 times more effective at mobilizing voters than a door knock. Other studies have shown that a voter asked to turn out by someone they know is twice or more likely to vote as someone who was contacted through phone banking. The campaigns of President Obama, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Pete Buttigieg were all greatly impacted by voter engagement relational organizing strategies. With relational organizing, your people know you. You already have connections. You can get vulnerable. You can tell them what matters to you and why. Relational organizing can create a significant impact and drive meaningful change. And just last week, did you see what happened with the Vote Uncommitted campaign? Here in Michigan, where the campaign started just weeks before the primary presidential election, there were uncommitted votes in every county across our state. Over 101,000 Michigan residents cast uncommitted ballots for around 13% of the Michigan vote. And on Super Tuesday, Minnesota saw an even greater percent. Nearly 19% of its primary votes were uncommitted. 1 in 5 Democrats in Minnesota. Other states also carried a high percentage despite the last-minute nature of the state's protests. And whether you voted uncommitted or you have concerns about that movement, what you can be excited about is the people power that happened in such a short amount of time. So how do we do relational organizing? Listening is the most underrated organizing skill. Simply asking and being willing to hear what folks are concerned about reveals barriers you didn't even know existed. You may find out people you have known your whole life don't vote, or that they don't vote past the top half of the ballot. You may learn that your cousin tried to register to vote but couldn't find the right information, or that your next door neighbor feels so resigned or alienated that they don't see a value in their vote. When you take the time to hear the problems, you can actually help overcome barriers and increase participation. Let's try it now. Turn to your neighbor, ideally not someone that you know really well or live with. That might be a farther stretch. Think about a social issue that matters to you and ask them if they know about it. Have they heard about it? Do they care about it? And then after their response, give them your response and then give them an action to take. So everybody won't be able to do it, but if you feel an issue right now that you're passionate about, turn to a neighbor and ask them if it's something they know about, something they care about. Give them a response, and then give them an action they can take on that issue today. If you haven't yet, try to get to the take action step. What can people do? One more minute. This is the hardest thing ever, right? Stopping Unitarian Universalists from engaging in conversation. Try to wrap up your final sentence. Sitting up here was a really rich experience, even though I really wanted to be sitting with every 2 or 3 people that are in communication. If I had had my cell phone with me, I would have took a couple pictures, because it really, even though I wasn't a part of the conversation, it felt so good to see you all so engaged in issues that you care about. And I hope I'll hear about some of those as we move forward later in our day together. And if I don't, make sure you continue those conversations and take those actions that your friends have shared with you. The relationships you strengthen when you listen are building blocks of change. Relational organizing is not the tool. However, there are tools. If you have done any Get Out the Vote organizing over the last 8 years, you already know there are so many apps that are used for this. Things that you can download on your phone or computer. Oh, we need that last group to join us. There's so many apps to use for organizing and Get Out the Vote work these days. Things you can download on your phone or computer to interact with both people you know and complete strangers, with the goal of targeting low propensity voter data. Also, if you have done much Get Out the Vote organizing, you know that these apps, although similar to each other, are also very different to download, learn, and operate. Although they attempt to be user-friendly, they often are not. Some campaigns are realizing that. And one organizer says, quote, "With an app, you really are just limiting who's doing the work to people who feel comfortable with apps, people who have experience with smartphones, and those who trust the system." Are any of you hesitant to expand your use of digital tools, or worry that your target population is too old for digital organizing, or just find it frustrating? Other traditional methods still prove to be an effective and important part of a full relational organizing strategy. These methods include one-on-one conversations, house gatherings, door-to-door canvassing, or neighbor-to-neighbor postcard programs. If done right, these tools can be exceptionally useful and highly beneficial to a campaign. Greta Carnes, who led Pete Buttigieg's campaign, said, quote, "We saw a surprising additional upside to using pen and paper on Pete's campaign, especially at the beginning. By explaining our strategy to supporters and then asking them to map their networks on a piece of paper, our volunteers understood much more deeply what we were asking them to do. They knew we weren't mining their contacts data. We were literally bringing back the same notebooks to the same coffee shop every week and asking, how did your conversation with Sheila go? We had much more buy-in from volunteers when we first operated on pen and paper, and I think it's because it really helped them understand what we were asking them to do and why." It's also important to realize when using apps for relational organizing, it often takes out the relational. Yes, people may be reaching out to people they know from their own devices. However, by using a scripted text prompt instead of a personal message, often the messages are ignored or not just taken as seriously. In a 2020 Mother Jones article, "The Pandemic Wrecked Traditional Campaigning, Relational Organizing Stands to Reinvent It," was the name of the article. Nick Chedley Carter, who in 2020 was the managing director of Resilient Democracy, a civic engagement initiative, said, Part of the reason why this stuff is effective is because it's authentic, he said. If you take away the authenticity from it and you make people feel like cogs in the machine, then their enthusiasm isn't going to be as strong. The recipients of the message are going to know it's not real. Suddenly, the target voter is treated as a consumer rather than a partner. What do you want your organizing to look like? What values do you want to be clear to the communities you organize with? Consumer or partner? Charity or solidarity? Transactional or relational? From the blog fakeequity.com, transactional means to treat people as a transaction, something to do, something to accomplish, a checkbox sort of activity. We don't create a sense of belonging in transactions. Transactions can have elements of relationship building, but they may still not be relational. Relational ways of interacting are how we make change. It humanizes each and can lead to deeper social change. Relational work means investing more of ourselves into the work and personalizing the work, which can feel taxing at times, but in the long haul, it leads to deeper and more impactful work. As humans, we need to create connections with each other to build trust, iterate off of each other's ideas, and to connect. The trust that comes with relationships allows us to probe more deeply and to make changes that improve services and programs. When working in relationship with each other, we create a feeling of belonging, accountability to each other, even if it's through brief interactions. We see each other. Relationships built on listening, trust building, longevity, and openness will flourish more than interactions that are one of or one-sided. Relationships over transactions. In her book, Emergent Strategy, Adrienne Maree Brown says, quote, in a non-linear process, everything is part of the learning, every step. That includes constructive criticism. It is part of the feedback loop. Experiment, gather feedback, experiment again. This is how we learn. Feelings will get hurt in this learning process, in this relationship building process, in accountability processes. And I wanted to give an example in my life that in the moment kind of shook me, but was such a thorough learning experience, and I was so glad to be a part of an accountability relationship. A friend of mine is a musician. His name is Joe Riley, and I was in an event where he was leading a drum circle. And at the end of the event, he laid his drum down in the center space, which I now recognize as an altar space. And I ran over and grabbed his drum and wanted to play it. And he quickly kind of grabbed my arm and said, Jen, don't just grab my drum. And then later had a longer conversation to me about what a spiritual piece of object his drum is to him, and that it was on an altar. And if I wanted to engage with him and his drum, that it should have been led with a conversation. I was glad that Joe felt he could call me in that way. I have another friend, Rocket, who I really appreciate, who held me accountable not just with my behavior, but to our relationship. We had a disagreement of sorts, a misunderstanding, and I felt so angry and so frustrated with him. I didn't even think that our values aligned anymore. We had been really good friends for a long time, and I just kind of stomped away cussing from the experience and decided I just wasn't going to be his friend anymore. And it hurt because I cared about him, but I couldn't deal with thinking about what the resolution would look like. It was going to hurt. It was going to make me angry. I was probably going to feel embarrassed. It scared me. And so I just stayed away. And he would try to call, and he would send me text messages. And finally, we saw each other in a shared space. And he pulled me to the side and he said, Jen, we at least have to have a conversation. We're very good friends. We love each other. And I'm so grateful that he did that, because if I hadn't, I would have lost a really good friend. And so I'm glad that he was able to pull me in and be accountable. We were both able to be accountable to our behavior, but also to the relationship that we were in. So the question is often asked, how do you get eager people with resources to slow down? Or I ask that question a lot to Unitarian Universalists who often have resources and are concerned about issues and are ready to go and build relationship with community and fix things. But this often causes great harm. Have you heard the term microaggressions? Have you heard, how can an aggression be micro? This is something to think about. I know it takes a long time and it often feels like we're not getting the work done. It is hard to calendar the next event or action, but that's okay. That will come. I heard this on a blog recently. Do you want to create the model plane or the real plane? Because nobody's going to fit in the model plane, and it isn't going anywhere. Urgency makes frontline, overwhelmed activists feel very stressed, like they're letting people down. I experience this in meetings all the time. It is the system that is letting them down, but so do we when we show up with a sense of urgency and expectations and not willing to give in a way that can truly support their organizing. The International Disability Caucus, during negotiations surrounding the creation of the International Treaty with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, coined the phrase, "Nothing for us without us." Without the frontline community leading, the end goal becomes dehumanization. Done to them, not with them, and in many cases, not even for them, because their feedback wasn't even requested. Those with resources need to be transferring power and agency, becoming part of the social fabric. Follow the frontline, most impacted communities, Black, Indigenous, Latina, Palestinian, and other people of color. Follow literally and figuratively, but not blindly. Trust them. Let them trust and invite us in. Move at the speed of trust. Allow yourself to be held accountable and hold yourself accountable. At GA many years ago, I was in a session with one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, and a UU raised their hand and said something like, "My church is all white middle-class people. How do I build relationship with people of races and other cultures, other races and other cultures?" Her response was, quote, or something like, quote, "First of all, don't make assumptions about who is in your church by their physical appearance. But also go outside your building and go to their events and stay and help put away the chairs. This is where the true work happens. This is where relationships of trust and joy are built. And they know that you're serious about doing all the work. It takes time, but if we are serious about creating the communities we want our children to live in, we'll make it happen." There's great UU programs through the UA that are encouraging us to get out and connect with our communities beyond our building and walls. Great opportunities for relational organizing with your congregation. Green Sanctuary 2030, the Eighth Principle, UU the Vote, Side with Love. I know your congregation hasn't been involved in most of these, but if you want any more information, talk to me. So we're in this for the long haul. When a volunteer advocates for a cause, they aren't only sending a checklist of actions that their contact should take, they're inviting potential supporters to join an ongoing conversation and movement. When people feel connected to one another and believe in a common goal, they are more likely to take action and work towards achieving it. When we are in relationship and depend on each other, there is a level of commitment to the future. Elizabeth Hahn is the co-author of Groundbreakers, a nuts and bolts account of how Obama leveraged social networks in 2008. For her, a key of successful relational strategies is that they create a sense of loyalty that doesn't just increase voter turnout in a single election, but changes and strengthens communities beyond Election Day. To her, the answer lies in, quote, the extent to which they're able to create a set of relationships that generate the kind of constituencies that stand with each other over time. In its strongest form, relational organizing redistributes power from the people who run campaigns to the voters they are trying to win over. It lasts long after paid organizers pack up and head home. Racism and policing is in the public discourse much more now than it was 10 years ago. That could not have happened without Black Lives Matter, a textbook example of relational organizing. The movement gained prominence amid the 2014 protests in Ferguson, Missouri, following the murder of 18-year-old Michael Brown by a white police officer. Grassroots chapters formed across the country and prepared communities for continuing activism. And even before George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis in 2020, The city had a robust Black Lives Matter presence, community organizing networks, and a faith-based relational organizing programs. As protests and viral videos of police brutality spread, more Americans were pulled into the movement through conversations about race with friends and family. As many as 26 million people marched or protested in a matter of weeks after Floyd's death, a mobilization unequaled in recent history. I remember after George Floyd's murder, a very small group of us, maybe 10 tops, organized a car rally down Woodward from the suburban border of Detroit at 8 Mile down to the UU Church in Bloomfield Hills. Suburban silence is racial violence. We expected 30, maybe 50 cars. There were hundreds of cars and close to 1,000 people at the rally. It was certainly built on relational organizing. Each of the 10 of us reached out to 10 comrades who reached out to 10 more, and on and on. Joy Cushman said in a Mother Jones article, quote, "The uprisings are evidence of how powerful relational organizing is when it's completely unhindered and completely unleashed. Relational organizing works because of love and commitment to community. Once you are in, you are in. Practicing neighborliness and non-agenda relationships." At the UUGA in 2016, Reverend Sekou sang this song. "I can hear my neighbor crying, saying I can't breathe. Now I'm in the struggle, saying I can't leave. We are calling out the violence of the racist police, and we ain't gonna stop until the people are free." Being neighborly, building relationships, is countercultural, especially in organizing. In the United States, an individualistic mindset is constantly being pushed on us from all directions. Historically, there have been very separate cultures between our political culture and our movement building organizing culture. It is also true that it is rare when our social work culture, or educational culture intersect with our political culture. Most of us have heard or learned firsthand to avoid conversations about politics, even and especially with our family members and in social circles. Don't rock the boat. But how do we rock the boat and keep it afloat at the same time? It takes community. This is the place to look at lessons from the Black Panthers. What they were doing was certainly relational organizing, building in programs and services for people and children in their communities, listening to what people needed and helping to stabilize their basic needs. If we have each other to keep the boat afloat, we can take turns rocking it at the same time. How do you move? I spin webs. I spend time in hives and in flight and in formation. I live like mycelium under the ground, making connections and sometimes breaking them up to recreate healthier systems. I believe in the interdependent web of existence and my role in it. I used to do an activity with children in RE when I was director of religious education with yarn, and we would throw the yarn around and create a web. And then we would identify ourselves as different pieces of the web, the bird and the wind and the tree, and then we would pull the web. And if the bird pulled the web, who could feel the tug? All of us. And if the tree pulled the web, who could feel the tug? All of us. I build relationships for the long haul. This is how I've always perceived relational organizing. I've been organizing for almost 3 decades. Southerners on the Ground song gave this definition for relational organizing. It really speaks to me. Relational organizing starts with a group of people who have relationships with each other. It is a type of community organizing that relies on and prioritizes relationships both inside and outside of an organization to build stronger, more dynamic, and creative collective power. It includes base building, political education, issue identification, training, and action, end quote. Building power that centers authenticity, trust, shared values, and a sense of community. Beyond a single action, not issue-based or event-based, but value-based. Although I agree with much of Saul Alinsky's teachings, I am not his student. I am a student of Grace and Jimmy Boggs, Mama Gwen Winston, Mama Lila Cabell, my parents, Arlene and Bob Teed, and too many Unitarian Universalists to name. and our faith itself, especially the values of the eighth principle and proposed Article 2, beginning with the worth and dignity of each human being and ending with the interdependent web of existence and taking actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppression in ourselves and our institutions. Grace Lee Boggs had a sign on the wall of her home that read, "Building community is to the collective as spiritual practice is to the individual." I don't know if you remember in 2005, a young Army specialist, Casey Sheehan, was killed in Iraq. His mom demanded an answer from President George Bush. She followed him on vacation to Texas and set up camp with anti-war protesters from around the country. Before a contingent was headed to Camp Casey from Detroit to raise greater awareness, they set up a camp for a weekend downtown at Grand Circus Park. Inside sleeping bags on a well-lit corner with all kinds of people stopping to ask what we were doing is where I met my best friend Isis, who did go down to the Texas camp for a week following. I just spent some time with her on Friday night. We discussed this topic of relational organizing a bit. I think what kept coming back around is that there is not a strategy to relational organizing, it's a lifestyle. This is the work. The means are the end, for us at least. By the time the Occupy movement began in 2011, many of the people I was spending time with were organizing and resisting the systems in some capacity. I had been organizing with some of these folks since college and others since the Iraq War began. Many folks have stuck around, or we bob and weave, or tag team to focus on different issues for a while, and then find ourselves in the same spaces again, or a part of larger coalitions. My movement work has continued, and I have advocated for fair and affordable housing and clean and affordable water. I have opposed Line 3, Line 5, and other oil and tar sand pipelines and environmental atrocities. I have organized for racial justice with Surge and the Suburban Connection for Collective Liberation. I have been involved in too many things to name, but my point is that I have done all this with great intention to build relationships for the long haul. It is my life, out of love and commitment to community and to justice for all, worth and dignity to every human being. I also do it because it provides a great sense of hope and for the joy. This is my life. As far as I know, I only have one. I want to enjoy my time here and spend it with people who share my values. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. I have been taking relational organizing to another level, I guess, and I want to encourage you to do the same. You may not have ever organized an event, a protest, a concert. You may not have had the experiences I've had or as many opportunities to engage. However, you know people and you've got connections. And so before I leave you today, I just want you to think a bit about who are those people in your lives. There's some exciting events coming up in the next month or so, and I'd love for you to do some relational organizing around these with and for me. March 22nd is World Water Day, and so the middle of that week, there'll be all kinds of actions to take in Lansing, in Cincinnati. I'll be sending things to Miriam, she'll forward them to you. Think about, who do you know? Family members, work colleagues, social justice comrades, church members, neighbors, community groups, social or sporting groups. And reach out to them and see if they know about how many people are suffering from unaffordable water or the lack of clean water still in Flint. Ask them if they know about Dana Nessel and her case against Enbridge Oil, that Enbridge Oil wants to go to the federal courts, but she wants to keep here in Michigan. Ask them if they know about women who are in jail because they can't afford a small bail fund to get out. Ask them if they know about the Mother's Day bailout. Even when all else fails, the most important tool at our disposal is our relationships, our ability to talk with one another about things that matter. Relationships are what gets us and will get us through. Look at the Palestinians. Wow, now that is some relational organizing that's been going on there for decades, that has prepared them to deal with the murder of parents and children, starving and dehydrated, displaced without basic belongings. But what do we see amidst the devastation? People caring for and helping each other, their loved ones and, quote, strangers. But there doesn't appear to be such a thing there. And they have a strong will to live and create a different life for the future. Relational organizing is something every single one of us can and must do. And I just want to share these closing words that came from a meeting I was at, and I asked if I could quote them for this service because I thought, yes. I attend a weekly meeting. I invite you to join me. It's about ending cash bail and bringing people home. And two of our core team members, the first quote comes from Alexandria Hughes, and the second from Mary Barber. Alexandria says, "Community lights the flame for hope." And Mary Barber says, "Community is fuel for the journey." Thank you.